Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Soul Seeds, where Mariah is my guest expert for today. And Mariah is both a trauma therapist and a motherhood empowerment coach. And the topic we're going to discuss today is how to sever the mom rage cycle. So, welcome, Mariah. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I would love to know exactly what is the mom rage cycle?
Yeah, so it's something that I've noticed over the past 9 years working with families, specifically mothers, and it shows itself really well in a cycle. So there's some sort of external trigger that occurs, and it
Mhm.
causes this activation in our central nervous system, and we can feel overwhelmed, overstimulated, irritated, right? And it builds and builds and builds until there's this peak moment. And that peak, that pinnacle is the mom rage, the rupture that
Mhm.
happens. And it's characterized by these big episodes of rage and anger, and it can be very explosive, and it feels like it's out of nowhere.
Mhm.
Most women come to me and they're saying that they have this that's occurring and they don't know why. So they know they're on this merry-go-round, but they don't know
Mhm.
where it started.
Right, they
And
can
then
pinpoint it.
yeah, no, they know that it's happening, but they don't know what's happening before. They don't know what these triggers are or how to manage them. And so they have this mom rage episode, this rupture, and then two things normally happen afterwards. There's this kind of guilt, heavy guilt and shame. They feel really bad for what they did. They were very out of control. And so they sweep it under the rug because there's a lot of shame associated with it. And in their brain, they say, I'm never going to do this again. I have to get this together. I'm not going to do it again. But nothing changes because they don't know how they got there. Or they still are, steeped in the guilt and the shame, but they'll say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. Mommy got mad, da 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 da, and they try to do the repair work, which is great, but the behaviors don't change. And it's
Right.
because it's very cyclical. So my whole, program and what I do is set to actually sever that cycle. They can hop off that merry-go-round so they're not, doing this over and over again.
Because as you said, they try to repair it on the outside, but they have to do the repair on the inside.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And a
is it
lot of the times
also,
it's,
oh,
oh, I'm
sorry.
sorry.
No, I wanted to know, is it also related to like postpartum depression, or is that something else completely?
It can be a contributing factor. So it can take up to 1 year postpartum after giving birth to stabilize in our hormones. And then if we breastfeed, it can be, 2 years. So yes, hormones do play a role in this that can
Mhm.
exacerbate mom rage. Yes.
So how can they start that work on the inside and recognize the cycle that they're in?
Yeah. Yeah, so I promote an eight phase process for this, for severing this. And step one is really recognizing the impact of trauma on parenting.
Mhm.
How we got to where we are today. We carry a lot of narratives with us from our early life experiences, whether we're aware of it or not.
Mhm.
And it can, I actually just had a graduate of my program say, there were things that I knew as a child that I absolutely did not want to do. So I
Mhm.
overcompensated and went way, way, way too far to the other side. And
Right.
then there were things that were mirrored to me that I defaulted to, right?
Mhm.
When you're in a state of crisis, or you're in emotional brain or survival brain, you will default back to the lowest level of training, right?
Mhm. Right.
The most basic foundational things. So if your foundation is baked in kind of these traumatic experiences, or low stress tolerance, or you were never taught how to manage your emotions, work through them, process them. You were just, kids are to be seen, not to be heard. So now you
Right.
as an adult don't know what to do with these big feelings because your kids trigger you. All kids trigger you. All kids make you feel angry, or you feel angry at some point, you
Mhm.
know. So it starts there. And
Right.
that's a longer part of the phase because it takes a bit to untangle those narratives. It's kind of like tangled up Christmas lights, and you have to, sit
Yeah.
for a while and
And you have the
process.
tendency to just like fall back, as you said, to your like default settings, because if you don't know better, you can't really do better.
Correct. Yeah. So I teach, you can't regulate something if you don't recognize it. So we
Mhm.
start really with
Yeah.
that recognition piece.
Mm. And why do you think like there's a lot of like false images of women, doing it all, handling it all well, with a smile on their face, having a job and kids? And why do you think this is still something that women tend to strive for? Because it's not very healthy to do so?
Oh, that's a big question. I do think there's a lot of cultural influence, especially with social media where the content is curated, right? There's nothing that's not edited. They show you the highlight reels, all the rainbow stuff. Very few people are going to go out and show that, even me, I teach this and I have bad days, right? Like they're not going to show that. They're going to show themselves doing everything all of the time. I do think pending what society you live in plays a big difference. Like here in the United States, we're a capitalistic society. It's very hyper independent. That's what's kind of pushed. The narrative is like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, do it all, do it by yourself, dig yourself out of your own hole. Except we're not actually wired that way as a species. We are meant to be interdependent, right? Like we're relational beings.
Yeah.
So we're actually going against our natural instinct, which is
nature.
which is towards connection because of what these narratives of what we're being taught. It's not codependency. You don't want that. You don't want, your only outlet to be someone else. That's the only way that you can regulate. But hyper independence, right? Like both ends of the spectrum is also not healthy. It's that in between. So
yeah, balance is the most important. But also, as you mentioned, we live in quite a male-dominated or male energy-dominated society where, the young male energy is, just everywhere and dominates mostly social media, TV, and so on. How can we tap into, as a female, into our own feminine, sacred energy?
Well, I think that that's what phase, I think I have a phase 4 or 5 is like finding your authentic self. And I do a lot of parts work. So if you're familiar with internal family systems, I use IFS work with mothers to tap into different, defense mechanisms, coping mechanisms. And instead of demonizing it, putting it in a box, compartmentalizing, it's, how do you befriend these parts? Is it okay for us to have this manager part that is very hyper independent and a bit more masculine? Is it okay for us to have this more feminine, soft, nurturing, caregiving part? And how do we make all of these different parts of ourselves work together for the system being the core sense of self, right? Like, how do we do that? So a lot of it is actually getting to know these different parts without judgment, without shame, because there is no bad part. Dr. Dick Schwartz, who is the founder of IFS, hey, there's no bad parts. They served a purpose, most likely in some capacity to keep us safe in the best way that part knew how. But as we grow as women and mothers, sometimes that's not as effective anymore, right? We're not some 12-year-old little girl who has to lash out anytime she feels threatened, right? We have the skills as a grown woman to, okay, hey, appreciate you part. You're just trying to keep me safe, but I don't need you to lash out. What would that part rather be doing as a protective part, right? Like, how can it keep us safe without screaming at our kids and other people? So we spend a lot of time in that phase as well.
Yeah, because usually under that rage, there's just other symptoms that are actually crying out for help, right?
Yes. So, sometimes anger is just anger. If I stump my toe on the corner of a piece of furniture, I'm angry. But if I really thought about it, it's because I felt what first? Pain, right? Anger is most of the time a secondary emotion. There's like an anger iceberg. So underneath of it might be fear, rejection. You think that there's a threat. You might feel depressed. You might feel lonely, overwhelmed, overstimulated, all these other things. Which is part of that recognition piece. If you can recognize these other primary feelings first and handle those, you are severing the mom rage cycle, because you're not then getting to that, on a scale of 1 to 10, you're not getting to that 10 of rage because you've dealt with what needs to be dealt with first.
So it really has to do with like becoming aware of those deeper emotions, basically shadow work, really.
Yeah. Yes. And also cultivating support though, right? Because we're not meant to do this alone. So we spend 2 different phases talking about cultivating resilience and cultivating support and what that looks like in today's society.
And to all the new moms watching, how can you prevent burnout and to getting to that peak?
Yeah. I would say sustainable preventative self-care. So small things count. We live in a society that likes to say that only self-care that counts is pampering. There's a difference between self-care
Right.
and pampering, right?
Very much so.
So yeah, the daily practices, the 5 minutes here, the 5 minutes there of doing things that refill your cup are extremely important for not getting to that 10 out of 10 anger and not getting to that area of, burnout.
And as you mentioned, like creating that awareness, and it's all about like self-discovery, right? Like, okay, what triggers me? Know your triggers. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. And that's a drawn out process because I don't think that anybody will ever know every single one of their triggers. But you can recognize themes, certain patterns that, okay, you might be a little bit more likely to be triggered here, activated here. For example, me, I have 3 children, I have 3 boys. Bath time was always very chaotic. So it was like that bedtime routine. It wasn't just that individual thing that was triggering. It was that, pattern, that winding down and getting my kids to wind down. So recognizing that, I was able to shift and then avoid that altogether so that I wasn't getting angry.
And I think also with moms, they tend to see self-care and taking time for themselves. Also, that comes with some like shame and like, oh my gosh, should I be doing this? I could be reading a story to my kid right now or playing with my kid right now. How can we drop that shame and guilt and take care of ourselves?
So I definitely think that it's a cognitive restructuring, right? It's a reframing of the way that we're actually looking at self-care. If you're looking at self-care in that capacity, I would think that you're probably looking at it as a luxury or as a pampering versus a necessity. Just like sleep. Sleep is not a luxury. Sleep is a biological necessity, right? As human beings, we need sleep. It is the same thing with taking care of yourself. That is a necessity, right? So for us to actually be able to show up as mothers, do what we are supposed to do, be the mother that we need to be for our children and for ourselves to cultivate our own motherhood experience, right? Self-care is pivotal to that. Taking 5 minutes to re-regulate, to engage in composure. Composure is emotional regulation in real time. That counts as self-care. Taking the deep breaths, putting in, ear pods and listening to your favorite song so you can decompress while cooking dinner, or going outside and putting your face in the sunlight for 10 minutes as your kids, play or whatever. That all counts as self-care. So I think a lot of the times we do things and we don't even recognize it as self-care. If you don't recognize it as self-care, you're not going to treat it as such. Right. So to be able to revel in it, we have to recognize it. If you're looking at it as a luxury, you're probably going to have a lot of, guilt and shame. Cognitive, shift is that it's a necessity. If you want to show up as the mom you want to be, these things need to happen.
It's as necessary as, having a healthy meal every day. And like you said, as sleep. So it's not a luxury, it's a must.
Correct. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mariah, for today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.